Good evening and welcome to the Town of Sandwich Finance Committee meeting for February 4th, 2025. Tonight's meeting is being aired on Sandwich Community TV and will be available for replay. I'm calling our meeting to order. Let's begin by rising for the Pledge of Allegiance. I would ask us to remember to turn on our microphones and speak clearly into them so those at home and those with us here in the auditorium can hear us as well. In an effort to provide residents with ample opportunity to provide thoughts and inputs to the Finance Committee on the fiscal 2026 budget, particularly on the topics that will be considered at each of our meetings during our budget preparation season, a public forum agenda item has been added to the beginning of our meeting. This may help shape our discussion and prompt questions from those presenting to us. This will be in addition to the public forum towards the end of the meetings for anyone with wrap-up comments. Is there anyone here with us this evening wanting to make public comment? No? Thank you. If you're at home listening in, please know that you're welcome to attend the Finance Committee meetings in person. We would like to hear from you. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes from our October 22nd, 2024 Finance Committee meeting. There has been we will delay this by 1 week for the correction and the addition of the names to who voted yes and who voted no, since there were on some of the warrant items going before a special town meeting, where when there's both yes and no's, not unanimous, we need to provide the names. So we'll get that corrected and we will look at that at an upcoming meeting.
I'll have that ready for next Tuesday.
Okay, thank you, Bill. The next item on the agenda is correspondence, statements, and announcements. Last September, the town administrators held refresher sessions on the open meeting law and public records law. I have brought with me some of the packets from that meeting, so if any of the Finance Committee members would like one, they're back there on the stage. So feel free to take one of those before you leave tonight if you haven't received one already. I'd also like to mention that we currently have planned 6 additional meetings focused on various subjects of the budget in February and March. This is subject to change, and I'll keep everyone informed of those updates. The schedule includes next week discussion on the school budget. The week of February 25th, or on February 25th, we will have DPW, fire, and police discussions, as well as a discussion on the shared site of the DPW and fire station. On March 4th, we'll discuss wastewater and have a WIF discussion. March 11th, the plan is to discuss town and school capital budget presentations and then any follow-up that we might have coming out of our February 11th meeting with the schools. On March 18th, we will have a follow-up discussion and Q&A to cover all various aspects of what we've reviewed throughout the budget season. And then as our hope that we will vote on a capital budget and the fiscal 26 budget on the March 25th meeting. All of that in preparation for town meeting. Nancy.
Yes, I noticed that the Upper Cape Tech is not in the schedule, and I know you and I had talked about that. Could you explain why we're not inviting them back this year?
Sure. In discussions that Crystal, Bill, and I had in preparation for this year's schedule, we took some time considering priorities and those types of things. We have not invited Superintendent Forget to the meeting at this point, really with an understanding that we have little or no influence as a finance committee, or really even as a town, as to the outcome of the budget that they present. We also felt that not enough really significantly changes year from year, and that it might be a better idea to invite him every other year to come and present to us.
I just want to go on record that I disagree with that. I understand your reasons, but I think whether we change anything or not, we don't always change anything in any of the other presentations either. So, why have any of them come? And I just think it's good to hear what they have to say, unless he's preparing every other year for a 2-year budget, which I don't think he is. So I'm disappointed that we're not going to hear from him.
Any other thoughts from the rest of the committee members? Okay, thank you, Nancy. Does anybody else have anything to add for correspondence, statements, or announcements? Very good. Bud, could you lead us off on your report and then lead us into
Sure.
the budget discussion?
Maybe just a quick report that, I don't know, I thought you might be interested in. I know there's some questions about federal grants that the town may receive and what impacts, might be happening from the federal level. So about the only sizable grant that the town has right now is that Jones Road culvert replacement project. So that's still in the permitting and design phase, and so we're responsible for those costs outside of the federal grant. So it's a reimbursable grant. So I think the amount we will receive from the feds in our contract is supposed to be around $750,000, but right now all the expenses have been borne locally. And again, it's a reimbursable grant. We pay the costs and then get reimbursed. So, it's not like we have funds in our account. They're about 4 or 5 relatively small for the most part, i.e. $50,000 or less. Grants that public safety has received for equipment. There's that national police vest program that we try to replace things in a 3-year cycle. We've gotten some, when I say MEMA, that's mass emergency management. Many times they're giving out money that they've actually received from FEMA, Federal Emergency Management, and so we have a couple of generator grants. All of them has been fully expended and installed, with the exception of some carryover stuff on the high school. So we really don't have many, and the schools do get formula grants from the federal government, and I think there's about 8 or so different funding sources that they get from the feds. So I haven't heard that talked about at all, at least on the news, the few things that I've seen. It is sort of interesting that we've been getting direction from our federal delegation, from the Mass Municipal Association, and from the state. And I think sort of the story we've heard is just, be cautious, but no need to change any plans yet. So, really hasn't impacted us much, but in the scheme of things as a whole, we don't get many federal funds. So, and then if you want, I can just jump right into the budget presentation. My voice is like a little off tonight, so I apologize for that. Before I jump in, it's going to be very similar to what I presented to the select board last Thursday. Many of the things that I say will say multiple times, because we're trying to get make it as clear as possible on what the budget looks like, both in terms of a base budget and then an optimal outcome budget. And there's really only one difference, which we'll talk about quite a few times in the presentation. A ton of work has gone into this, and I really want to thank Bill for spending so much time putting this all together. I think almost every department had their full department budget proposals to them by Thanksgiving, where they could review things. We asked them if they had any significant changes from year to year in their operating budgets to let us know, and we held separate meetings with each of those departments to talk over those changes. I think a really fair way to describe all those changes is to provide level services. Some of the costs have gone up in a few specific areas, not all of them. And so we've tried to make adjustments to try to keep things sort of on a level playing field. So that's all included. We'll go over all that. And I know like Heather and Bill have spent a ton of time on the capital plan, trying to get that together, and the capital budget. So I really want to thank them for all their help. And then, without going into too many details, what I call our central administrative team, the three of us, the financial department heads, HR, and then our director of community services and director of community development. We met several times, and then we expanded it by another 6 department heads. I would say the last 3 weeks, we've probably met 6 times just to go through the presentation, to talk over, how we can explain things better. So hopefully that's reflective in this. I did try to get rid of a few slides that we've had every year, and there's a couple slides in going through it with the select board. I wish I had either taken them out or just summarized them instead of gone through every bullet on the slide. So hopefully tonight goes smoothly. If there's any questions along the way or at the end, we'll be glad to answer them. We know that there's going to be a review process. One common theme you're going to hear, for better for worse, we don't have the budget binders because specifically we're really waiting on our health insurance number. We were told a certain rough percentage to budget for in the fall, and that's what we did. And then we got better information only 2 Fridays ago, so it wasn't that long ago. That was about 5% higher than that on average. But each town is supposed to receive their specific amount, which is in a 10% range, by Valentine's Day. So we were hopeful that we'd hear before the select board meeting last Thursday. We didn't. We were hopeful we'd hear before tonight. We didn't. Literally, the binders are all set to go. It's just that if our percentage is way different than we thought, it'll change like 15 pages in the binder, and it would just sort of be a pain to get those back out. So appreciate your patience. As soon as we have that, we'll get them to everybody, hopefully next week. So with that, I'll just jump right in. And just to start with an overview that really summarizes everything, the recommended base general government budget is a 3.65% increase over last year, and it includes a few, but not all the remaining FY25 and beyond priorities. As I mentioned earlier, it addresses some increasing cost centers in departmental operating budgets. Probably the best example is the cost of vehicles. I don't know if you have seen that in your own businesses, but what Paul Tilton used to be able to get for $150,000 is now $350 to $400, and it's taking a long time to get those in. It does not, I want to stress that 3.65 does not increase the DPW public infrastructure improvements to try to get them to that long-term goal of $2.6 million annually. If we wanted to do that, the optimal outcome budget would need an increase of 6.05%. So once we know those better expense items from the state and our health insurance, that's something I think we should talk about in more detail in the ensuing weeks. But literally, that's the only difference between 3.65 and 6.05. It's $560,000 for DPW, which would get us to the number of 2.6 million. That's been a goal annually between state money and our own money for many, many years from both Select Board and Finance Committee. And then lastly, the capital budget for 2026 is a net amount of just under 1.15 million. And those are all within our current projections for town meeting. So just a quick overview of what the presentation will be. We'll take a look at some of those graphs that we tend to do every year about where our money comes from and where it goes. Briefly explain what's in the budget binders that you don't have yet, but that you'll get soon. Sort of highlight some of the primary topics in our financial database. Talk quickly about some of the bigger items in our recommended capital budget, and probably spend more time on the 26 general government budget, just so you'll hear about what's included in the base, and then the DPW public infrastructure increase to try to reach that long-term goal if we're able to do that. And then at the end, I'll just talk about some budget trends, some of our future issues and concerns, and give you an update on where we sit with those FY25 and beyond efforts. So just quickly, if the general public was interested, where does our money come from? And this is based on the approved 25 budget. I wanted to have some firm numbers. It's not what's proposed for 26, but it's fair to say these change very minimally each year. But 79% of our budget comes from taxes, another 11% from state aid, which is almost, the vast majority of that is the Chapter 70 aid that goes directly to the school department, which is $8 million. Our local receipts, which the biggest portion of that is our motor vehicle excise bills, also includes things like, building permit fees, the liquor licenses that our offices bring in, things like that, make up about 6 cents on the dollar. Our surplus revenue is, best way I could describe it is what we budgeted last year versus what our actual expenses were. So this is the difference in what we're able to use the following year, whether it's for most of the time capital issues or operational ones. And then lastly, just there's a very small percentage of other sources of revenue. And then where those monies then go, and I should explain that this is it, looking at the general fund budget. The way this is shown, about 42 cents on the dollar goes to the school operating budgets. General government operating budget's about 23 cents on the dollar. Our state and county assessments, which would include our charter tuition assessments, is about 6 cents on the dollar. Our employee-related overhead costs, so that would be health insurance and retirement expenses, is about 21 cents on the dollar. And that, it's pretty interesting when you look at that portion of the pie versus the general government operating budget. It's getting to be very similar, and with some of those employee-related costs growing, it's probably will exceed that in the next few years. About 5 cents on the dollar goes towards debt. We have some reserve funds, mostly the money that we set aside in our reserve fund that the Finance Committee oversees, and the transfers that we do for OPEB and Stabilization Fund, and then about 2 cents on the dollar goes towards capital purchases. And those are the ones outside of operating budgets.
But just so I'm clear, the 3.65 proposed increase in the general government budget is really affecting only the
Purple or blue.
purple
Yes.
at
Yep.
0.23.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. And then if you took all those expenses that you see on the slide now and divided them up into education, general government, and other, this is what you get. So when it says school-related costs, that's all education, charter schools, Upper Cape Tech, their portion of their employees' health insurance issues. Same thing with general government, our employee-related costs shifted over to the general government. There's a couple general costs, a couple cents on the dollar that you can't really classify either way. And then our debt here is about 4 cents, in the sense it's debt that benefits both sides, not just one side, if that makes sense. And then lastly, I want to stress this last slide is just operating budgets only. So no capital, no state assessments, no employee-related costs. So if you just look at operating budgets locally only, 60 cents roughly goes towards the school, 5 cents for Upper Cape, and then you'll see police, fire, DPW, our so-called big three that make up about 70% of the town budget. Libraries about 1.5%, and then all other departments, and it should say departments and accounts. So that would include legal expenses, everything. There's over 25 different accounts that make up that 12%. So there are a lot of small portions of the budget in that orange piece. So I think a lot of times people talk about maybe something that a smaller department's doing, and when you look at it on a bigger picture level, the bulk of the money goes to education and police, fire, and DPW, and the rest is pretty tiny.
Matt?
Silly question. Average surplus revenue, so we're at 5% for last year. Is that a pretty stable amount?
Been roughly about that. I think there's a whole separate slide on that in the budget binders that you don't have.
Yeah.
That shows the 5-year history, and we have data that goes back like 30 years. But
We've been doing better lately. A lot of that's driven by investment income.
Yep.
Because rates have been so high. We'll probably see that number dip a little bit once investment income comes down.
Okay.
But we have been doing better lately. We've been seeing some of the highest free cash probably in the last 2, 3 years, 4 years than we have previously.
And then obviously, if we hit a dip due to interest rates, that'll affect us negatively for that upcoming fiscal year a bit.
Yeah, the more free cash we have, the easier it is to budget the following year,
Okay.
So just want to highlight what'll be in the budget binders when you get them. And, it's the same 8 tabs that we've had for a while on all the backup information. And then we'll also have a thumb drive with all of the information electronically, that if you want to put it on your home computers, might be an easy way to look at things. And then, there's a lot of embedded links that Bill's added over time. So when you click on certain things about the overall town budget, it brings you to direct backup information. So I think we've tried to improve that each year, and every year we find something new to add or take away. And then for the public's sake, the entire binder, so exactly what your board has, exactly what the select board has, everything would be on a link that'll be on our homepage as soon as those are ready. I just want to show you, like, Melissa's done all the dirty work. Like, the binders are ready to go. It's just that if we have to change 15 pages in 3 different sections, it's a pain. And we really hope, just waiting a week will benefit us all. Again, I won't devote a ton of time to this, but in the first tab is the budget presentation material, and that one-page summary that you're so used to seeing of our revenues and expenses. We'll get to those later in the presentation, but my intent would be every meeting that the committee has, we'll put the base revenues and expenses, and when I show you what it looks like with a 3.65% versus a 6.05%, we'll include those two in your packets every week. And Bill had a great idea about maybe starting just a running list of, as things change and we update them, maybe we'll just do a running list for you guys in a Word document, the date, the meeting and what we changed, just so people be aware as things develop. Tab 2, which is the overall budget, it's a very similar format to 26. Again, we're going to have those embedded links, so when you click on anything in the revenues or expense summary, it'll bring you to the relevant backup. And we have updated those, and we'll continue to update them as we get better information from the state. Tab 3 is our financial database, and I know I say it every year. If anyone from the public wanted to know what's the best way to learn about the town's finances, I would ask them, just spend the time and read tab 3 times. Like, if you looked at that just to know what's in there and where to turn, there's so much detail in there, not just about finances, but our demographics. And I think that's one of the things that we really find interesting is the demographic changes that have happened over time. And things like percentage of second homes, it's really interesting. And I know we've talked about it before, but demographically, we're way more like a South Shore town than a Cape Cod town. But there's similarities as well for Cape Towns. So the general format isn't changed, but we've streamlined it a little bit. Most importantly, there's full explanations of where our money comes from, what we spend it on, and I know you guys are familiar because you've seen it, but we try to show the last 5 years. But if you unhide the cells between those, there's over 25 years of data if you really wanted to look at it that people could do from home. Our capital budget, again, has a net increase of our net appropriation recommendation of $1.143 million. We're continuing our commitment to annually fund at least $150,000 in the town and school building maintenance efforts. We know that's not enough. And a little bit later, I'll tell you what we're doing on the general government side based on Brian's presentation to the board last June. You'll also see that the next biggest account that we have is another $425,000 for school capital needs, and we've kept that fairly open so they can decide where that goes. They asked for more. We felt that was the most that we could afford right now. There's some police and fire vehicle replacements, just over $135,000. We're trying to appropriate some money into our emergency management account as a one-time source. I know you guys are familiar, but if an emergency happens, we have flexibility to spend funding that might not be specifically appropriated for a direct purpose, but we have that flexibility in an emergency. The tough part is when we spend those, if it gets approved by FEMA, which is many times the storms that we can think of, say the last 5 years haven't been that level. There's some bigger ones years ago that made that level. It's usually 3 to 5 years before we see the reimbursement. So we just thought it would be wise to leave the 50, just let it be. If we need it, it's something to turn to. And our goal would be not to, replenish it unless we really had to. Yep.
But just going back for a second to tab 3, when you said you have sorts of, percent of demographics and whatnot, is there a way to get the percent of student population Not really the numbers, because often I hear the numbers, but our population changes. There's a way to get the percent of students that left Sandwich Heights Public Schools in 2010 compared to 2025?
We have all that. Some of it I'm going to highlight a little later, but we have the longer term data. It's all in that database binder, so that will be in there.
Perfect.
And I'm going to touch on specifically, the enrollments that were certified last October, so I'll touch on those.
All right, great. Thank you.
And then we're also updating some of our voting machine replacements we do on a periodic basis. Tab 5 is the general government operating budget. You'll see there's a lot of detail. Every employee is listed by name, position, to the dollar. That's the budget totals by departmental account, which is like a quick summary. There's a lot of backup that Bill has in there. So again, not to be a broken record, you'll hear this multiple times, but the base budget is at 3.65%. There's a few small FY25 and beyond priorities that we funded in that, which I'll go into a little bit more detail later. I think in Bill's words, it's a vanilla budget. It's pretty much level service with some of those expense items that have gone up addressed. And then the difference between that and the 6.05% increase is purely if we could get the DPW public infrastructure another $560,000, it would meet that optimal goal of getting $2.6 million between the state money and our money annually. And I want to stress that we're always trying to think about new ways of providing services or addressing problems. We're very open-minded about that, and we take advantage, particularly in our HR department, anytime any position becomes open, a group of us look at the job description, how can we make it better, what can we add? And I don't know if you've seen in the paper lately, there's been a couple department head positions that'll be turning over. A long-term department head's retiring soon, so the building commissioner job just got advertised. I think I was down in the HR office today. I think there's like 8 different positions that are on the wall right now. They post them there just if people are interested so they know what's going on. And I really can't thank the committee and the select board and the public enough for that FY25 and beyond. I think Bill used to say, like, when you looked at our organizational chart, it was so flat, and we've been able to do a little bit of triangular shape, and it's made a really big difference, I think, in trying to provide better services without a lot of extra money. And then tab 6, 7, 8, it's set aside for the school, Upper Cape Tech. There's a bunch of miscellaneous information in the back of the budget binder that you'll see. I have our cherry sheets, Bill's official, and Dave Sullivan's official debt schedule. So we have summaries in the summary information, but if you wanted to know like every single bit of debt that we have left to pay, it has each issuance per page going all the way till it being paid off. And then this year, and we have some of the FY25 and beyond information, but because of the impact on health insurance, we got some background information from our health insurance company in the fall, mostly related to our retiree plans, but a lot of the information in there was relevant for everything. And it's really a national problem, not just local and regional. So we just thought it was really interesting, so we're going to have that in the back. And then again, a stick drive, so if you wanted to put anything on your home computers or look it up electronically. So just the general government recommended 26 operating budget. So these are the significant changes. So the base budget at 3.65%, it includes an increased $60,000 in the facilities department for general repairs and maintenance, and I think that's the amount that Brian highlighted when he was before the committee, when he and Heather and others went over all the different improvements that they've done at all of our buildings and their systems that they use to track all that. We've added some extra money in IT for flexibility, and I think that's something that we've talked about a lot. To their credit, our IT department often finds a way to fund the first year of software that departments might be interested in, but then when it comes to the annual costs, we don't usually add money to their budget, so we want to have a little bit more flexibility. When I say a little bit, I think it's $50,000 we've added there just to try to help some of those needs to keep us up to date. And then our tree warden program, our tree warder, James Sacco, has just been awesome. Some of the things, I don't know if you've seen him about town in the last year or so. So there's a couple things that we'd really like to address, so we've added a little bit extra money in there so he has more flexibility. There's a couple of long-needed positions that we put aside money for, not for the full position, but to be coupled with some existing funds. So to be really specific, the assistant library director position, we added 50,000 to the library budget. Most likely we're going to wait for any vacancy that happens in the future, and it might be, potentially could be a shared position, like, you know, a blank position / assistant director. It's a definite need. If you look at year-round staffing, believe it or not, when you exclude the transfer station, because that's an enterprise fund, library has more staff than DPW. And so it would help to have some oversight, especially where they're open on the weekends, just to have some oversight at different points. It's something that we've wanted to do for a while. And then we put aside about 25,000 for a part-time grants and communication position that we think would be really helpful. One of the parts that I told the select board last Thursday, which I don't think people realize, we're pretty successful when we go for grants, but when you get the grants, there's a lot of follow-up that's needed, and it's fair to say that might not be our strong point. And so the accounting office in particular said, boy, it would be nice to have someone who specializes in grants, not only to get more, but to help with some of the reporting that they have to do to follow up on those grants, to get the reimbursements timely, and to keep things moving. We don't think 25,000 will get us, you know, a lot of hours. We plan to maybe, if a position becomes open or we save some money somewhere, add a little bit more to that. Maybe share a position with a town. It's just something we want to try to work towards. When police, fire, and DPW come in, I know they're going to talk to you about the increased costs on some of their vehicles and other operating expenses. So the big one is DPW with their larger trucks outside of our capital budget. So we've added another 200,000 to DPW to help with those vehicle replacements. A similar amount, much less of an amount, I should have said, about 109,000 we're adding to police, not just for vehicles, but some of their other line items. And Chief Keen can explain, none of their cruisers last, they don't even meet the definition of capital because they don't last 5 years. You know, we turn them over every 3 years roughly. And the costs on those have gone up significantly. So he'll touch on that. And in fire, they've identified some shortfalls just to keep things the same of about 97,000. So between those three budgets, they're our biggest three, they still get a lot of the attention in terms of needing to try to keep things level. It does upfront the first year costs for that required short-term rental inspections. Once we upfront it the first year, the plan is once town meeting adopts the general bylaw, the fees that we'll charge will cover that cost. So we're going to upfront that about roughly 50,000 the first year. That won't be in our budget next year because we'll have it from the revolving fund. And it also incorporates some reorganization and efficiencies and savings. So I think we told you we'd cut at least 75,000 from our shared positions at 100 Route 6A, which we've done. That's included in here. There's a couple of other thoughts we had as people approach retirement and how we might do things differently. And there were a couple of positions that we had thought we would need in that FY25 and beyond, that now that we're trying to have more cooperation between departments, which has always been there, but if there's a good example is today, Melissa in our office was out sick. We didn't do it, but we could have asked one of the other departments, hey, could you come answer the phones? We probably should have, and I know they would have done it, things like that. So there was a position, if you remember, that we were going to share between our office and HR. We've put that off for another year because we don't think we need it. So that's at the 3.65%. In your budget binders, there is a one page that compares last year's operating budgets to this and only highlights things that have gone up by more than 25,000. It actually includes everything. It's a pretty short list. So it's all those things I just said and a couple of small others. Another example is I think our personnel expense account is down by 100,000 from last year, and I know postage costs are going up.
Yeah, postage is, a new one. The post office raised rates in July over 8%. That hit us. One of the things that has really kind of impacted our postage budget is the mail-in voting. That didn't exist 4 or 5 years ago. That's now impacting us quite a bit, mailing the ballots back and forth and what have you. So postage is one of those examples you'll see going up.
But on the IT improvement side, Does any of that include any attention to security? There's
Yeah, so
that risk just keeps
Yeah,
growing.
at some point, we should have Mike Toomey come in, our IT director. Sometimes we think we're a little too secure because we can't get to things we need to. But no, he is exceedingly careful. And I mean, I'm sure in general terms, without divulging what he shouldn't, that would be good. And also, if you remember, we highlighted in last year's budget that payroll is our biggest internal weakness. So we were actually successful. Heather submitted a community compact grant to the state, so we're working with consultants from UMass Boston to look at our payroll services, so treasurer, accounting, HR, the school offices. We've been meeting with them to try to find a solution. I think we're probably leaning towards, at some point, switching to privatizing our payroll, not in terms of doing the dirty work, but in terms of issuing it, doing the federal and state reporting, things like that. Maybe too soon to say that we're there yet, but that's something that we're looking at.
But on the tree warden program, you said it was a small amount?
It's 25,000.
25 on that one?
Over the years, we've tried to increase their budget. They're in the parks, and they have a separate line item. It's fairly small, and so I'm trying to get them a little bit more so they have some really nice plans. We're trying to work with the advisory landscape group, and we did get a small amount of money from the Visitor Services Board, so we're trying to do some replantings on Main Street. They have some specific areas. I don't know if you've seen the bucket truck around a lot. There's 3 people in it. They're going to town. They really have gotten a lot done. And James has been really successful getting some grants as well.
Thank you.
And then literally there's only one difference with that optimal outcome budget at the 6.05%, and I'll explain why we came up with the 560 in a few more slides, but that's to bring the DPW public infrastructure to the long-stated $2.6 million goal. The additional amount needed is $560,000. I would say, and it's not to be made early on in the process, but once we know some of those other numbers better from the state and our health insurance, that is probably the primary policy decision that the select board needs to consider, and the finance committee, and that's, do we tap into the excess levy capacity a little bit to try to address that recurring need within operating budgets and to avoid a debt exclusion down the road. I will say, I think, we've had a lot of fits and starts with our road money, and I think when we did the road bond, we needed to do it at the time, and then the goal has been, is there a way we can try to avoid that moving forward, and that's what our goal's been. And then lastly, I just want to stress that in addition to trying to look at expenses, we're also trying to identify new revenue sources. So rightfully, I know the Select Board and Finance Committee decided last year we didn't want to count on a speculative donation to help with our offsetting our school resource officer position. So In Good Health, the medical and retail marijuana facility in town, gave us a donation 2 weeks ago of $200,000, and it's their intent to do that annually. So we're trying to work out sort of revising our host community agreement, which those are no longer valid anymore, as the Cannabis Control Commission has issued regulations. So our goal is to try to get a new host agreement to the Select Board by mid-March that would also spell out the donation agreement. And our big thing is the donation agreement, we can't hold their feet to the fire, but if they decided that they can't give us that anymore, our goal would be let us know by July 1st for the following July 1st, so we would have time to figure that out. And they've really been great to work with, I can't stress enough. And they, to their credit, wanted to find a way to donate money to the town because those host impact fees were going away. On the medical marijuana, the 3%? Yeah, the 3% on the retail, that's set in stone, but we were supposed to get other monies, which we haven't gotten since the Cannabis Control Commission changed the regs. And then also, the ambulance fund receipts have been coming in well, and Caroline Burke, our town accountant, and Bill felt comfortable enough, and Chief Burke, to increase the amount that we transfer to offset our fire department expenses by another $100,000. So that bumps it, I think, to $2.1 million. So when you saw that red pie that was 7%, That's net of the 2 million that we transferred the year we're in now. So there, if you look at the actual expenses, our fire department's slightly more expensive than the police department. They're close. And then the Weston Fund, which is the private group that gets elected, but it's a separate from the town. They have the library holdings over time, and they in bequeathments, and they invest those. So they let us know that they've been doing really well with their returns, and they said we should count on another 25,000 from them, which is helpful.
But is the need for the increased ambulance fund transfer to fire department driven continuing by overtime?
No, it's more that we're just trying to offset some of our costs. But in that 107,000, 97,000, there were some extra overtime funds that Chief Burke requested. In that 97, I think it was about 50, yeah. So now our enterprise funds, no one in the public realizes this, you guys do, the select board knows. We have 4 enterprise funds in town: the capital license fees, cable license fees, that help run Sandwich Community Television, our transfer station, Sandwich Hollows, and the marina. There's no significant changes in any of the 4 budgets, nothing that's appreciable. It is our 3rd year at Sandwich Hollows paying the debt on the irrigation and equipment project. Knock on wood, they haven't had any problems making those payments. We're still doing well. Winter golf is not a possibility this year, but they had some, I think John Johnson was bragging that they had their best November ever. It's pretty wild. So just wanted to touch on that modernization and efficiency plan quickly. And just to remind everyone, it was our goal last year, and we had presented it for a couple years, but just to try to organize ourselves and set us up better for the long term, mostly in terms of flexibility. It's a phrase that we used a lot, and the nice part was that the majority of the primary long-term capital, and I stress municipal building needs, have already been addressed. Like literally, and we're going to touch on this in a few minutes, all that's left on the town side in terms of newer buildings or massive renovations is the DPW barn and the downtown fire substation. With the public support, we've been able to address a lot of the other things that have been pent up. It's clear that the school still, as we all know, there's some bigger picture capital things we need to look at closer there. And the critical issues that we wanted to address in that plan were operational efficiency, trying to organize ourselves structurally better, recruitment and retention of staff, and just trying to focus on some regional efficiencies. And it's something that is printed in the back of the warrant in the long-range plan that the select board adopts, but I thought it would be worth it just to spend 2 slides talking about our vision statement and our guiding principles. So I don't want to read this because we can all read it, but the goal is to always evolve our public and community needs by enhancing, our long-term investments for public and community services, public environmental health, school and public safety, public works, and the financial capacity and flexibility to improve and innovate our local services. And as important as that is our guiding principles. And I wanted to go through these because this is really important, and a handful of us have been working on this for a while, but local officials, staff, and volunteers will foster the greater public good through respect, cooperation, kindness, integrity, and professionalism. I know we don't always meet every one of those, but we certainly should try to. There's times we all get frustrated, but I feel overall we've really done a good job trying to bring this home. Trying to have responsible financial stewardship that will help inform our decision making. I think a lot of times we say internally, like, oh God, people are going to say, here they go again. And I know, just talking for the 3 and 4 of us, like, we feel it's our job to say, if there's a problem, this is how we could fix it. We know we might not be able to get the support to do it, but if we needed to, here's what we need to solve that issue. And it helps inform what decisions the public ultimately makes. And that phrase about paying it forward for future generations, I know it's something that we all buy into internally, that we want to try to sort of pass the word and try to set ourselves a little bit differently than most communities. Appropriate staffing takes precedent over capital assets, but at some point, as we know, you got to address the capital assets. We always want to keep an open mind, be innovative and efficient, consider new ways of doing things, and we want to try to deliver a superior level of public service is our desired outcome. So it's something that, so those two things, Guy Boucher, our community services director, was able to put together a really nice laminated card that literally everyone who works for the town has been given. I keep buying on my desk. I'll be honest, I should read it more than I do, but it is there and I see it every day. So it's something that we're trying to work on. So mostly we want to say thank you for the FY25 and beyond. This is just a recap of what we were able to put in place last year. So an implementation summary is found in the back of the budget binder in tab 8. And our goal is to do, whether it's part of the budget review process or just after town meeting, we would love to come to the Select Board and Finance Committee and do a quick presentation on those impacts. Heather and our internal team worked on some quick public outreach just on those issue areas that I highlighted before. I think we had 8 of them that went out. Again, they were just trying to be quick, just updates to let people know what we've tried to do. I know when the appropriate department heads come in, especially police, because they got a lot of additions last year. I know Chief Keene wants to just talk a little bit about, what the community service officers have been able to do by having an extra one in the schools. I know our school resource officer, the outreach that he's been able to do with our new social worker position, and I mentioned this to the board last week. Literally within the last week or so, that person has been able to schedule 2 two-hour sessions each week at the Center for Active Living. So if anyone from the public wants to come and make an appointment, they're there just to try to see if someone wants some advice or have any needs that have to be met. The reports that Heather gets weekly on what's going on in the police department has been great. I know Dr. Maruschek and I are going to be talking about, I think they have a vacancy or 2 that we want to try to help them with to help sort of stem that time period. So, there's a lot of good things going on. Chief Keene would also update you that, and I know you guys are familiar because you've heard it, by the time we hire a new officer, by the time they go through the police academy statewide and the local training, it's almost a full year before they're actually on the road. So we really haven't been able to bump the extra staffing on 4 to midnight. We did get 2 officers out of the academy a week ago, and 2 just went in within the last few weeks as well. So that's all in the mix. So what we still want to accomplish, the top half is fiscal year 26. So all those things that are listed there are in the base budget. So I talked about the assistant library director, that part-time grant and communication specialist. We're going to have to figure something out. In addition to that, the extra money for building repairs and maintenance that Brian Schlegel was in last June. We did have the savings on the office efficiencies where we were able to work out the donation agreement on the SRO positions. And then, the public infrastructure, that $560,000 is the difference between the 3.65 and the 6.05. And then what we put off for next year is that shared office position that I mentioned that I think we'll probably be able to get rid of that next time. Fire has found a different way to skin the cat on the part-time administrative clerk. So far that's working out well, and we put that off for another year. And then this other one I think is for further down the road. But when we actually implement sewers, we're going to need some sort of wastewater director and someone in the office to help deal with billing questions and all the rest. That should come from user fees. But just like with that short-term rental inspector, we'll probably have to upfront the cost the first year. But we'll figure that out when the time comes. We're not there yet. So I really want to highlight 2 things that we talked a little bit about last year and give you updates. So we have 2 known significant savings that are headed our way fairly quickly. So over the course of the last year, the Select Board approved an intermunicipal agreement with Barnstable and Yarmouth. We received to provide regional dispatch services that will be housed in Barnstable. We're in the midst of our second grant from the state 911 department. And that's to take it all the way to proceeding with construction and design plans and then to actually issue a bid. And then the third grant would be to provide the actual construction funds to build it. So in a perfect world, there's representatives from police and fire, and Marie Buckner, our HR director, is spending time with the other HR directors to work out the personnel matters. In a perfect world, we might be able to break ground in August on this construction project. It's about an 8,000 square foot building. Chief Burke can talk about it best, so I'll save that for when they're in. But I know both departments are really interested in trying to proceed with that as quickly as we can, but as reasonably as we can. So the goal is to implement it during calendar year 27. So if you follow the bouncing ball, if it happens the second half of that year, we'll have some savings, which would be FY28, but it really won't be FY29 until you see the full savings, which are projected to be, at least based on the consultant's report, $700,000 a year for the first 3 years. And that was based on dollars from 2 years ago. So that should be very good. And as the committee knows, last year we talked about a way to address the so-called dark station issues at the police station. So that's all part of those net savings. So that's great. And then one of the things that I know we talked a little bit about last year, but our final payment for the Sandwich Hollows acquisition that was supposed to ideally come from Gulf revenue, but has been paid within our 2.5 limit for almost 25 years, expires in FY30. So that's a known savings of $4,000 annually. So really, by the time you hit $400,000, sorry. So by the time we hit, that's why he's the finance director. So by the time we hit FY31, I mean, that's legitimately $1.1 million we should be saving. And where we've put those things in place on the FY25 and beyond, I really feel strongly that, especially the regional dispatch savings, that should be a reduction in the town budget. Like, I think that year you're going to see a negative, level service budget because we'll be getting services from somewhere else. So those are two things to look forward to.
But just on the regional dispatch, if we're going to save projection $700,000 a year, do our costs, I would imagine Barnstable and Yarmouth have greater savings. So are the costs that we share proportional to the savings in some way?
So the savings is all based on the estimated percentage of our calls from each of our towns. So both of their towns balloon so much in the summer where ours doesn't as much. Percentage-wise, I think JJ would be able to tell you off the top of his head, I think we're less than 25%. Even though year-round population-wise, us and Yarmouth are really close. Barnstable's much bigger. But you would think we'd be higher than 25%. Like, our percentage of the estimated calls is below 20%, I think.
Yeah. Jim?
Yeah, when it comes to this, you said they're going to build some sort of facility. Do we know where this facility is?
Yeah, I'm going to screw up. Is it Bierce's? I don't know. You know where the Barnstable Police Department is? Just behind there, further down that road to the left. I think they're going to put right behind there an 8,000 square foot dispatch center.
Was there talk of how come they just couldn't use the sheriff's dispatch center?
Right now, they don't have the room for it, so they weren't taking on any new customers. I believe from everything that I've been told, and I've heard at a couple of group meetings, I believe the sheriff's office actually, and each group sort of sees it as a backup to each other if it ever went down. And so there's actually been a lot of cooperation between the two about how to address it. And I think right now the sheriff office just does fire, they don't do police. So that would have to be addressed. But they're actually looking at, with other towns that weren't able to join us, the sheriff's office is looking at possibly expanding as well.
Okay. Thank you.
I actually think they were possibly looking at a building in Hyannis as well. I don't know. So just want to talk about some of our long-term prioritized capital needs. I thought at the special town meeting, Bob Guerin had a really good point about, like, we need to be upfront with people about, as best we can, about what some of these bigger costs would be. And while we've knocked several off, there's a couple things out there. I guess one of which we control, meaning the DPW and fire substation. Wastewater, I don't necessarily think we control, but we certainly have to control and figure out how to pay for it. So in DPW facilities and fire substation, I think Matt has literally been assisting us for 3 years now, and it's taken up a lot of his time. I think when we get to that bigger presentation with the committee, you guys will see how much work has taken place, and we've made some significant progress over the last year. There were some real site challenges at the DPW site with topography issues, and they've been able to figure those out. And we think there would be significant improvements in public service with the new plan. If you really look at those two buildings, which we will certainly have you guys go through once the weather gets better, I mean, they don't come close, I don't think, to meeting code, and it's certainly modern codes. And, you know, credit to the staff who works there that they make do as best they can. So we have a conceptual design completed with cost estimates forthcoming. Our hope is that we would have cost estimates by that presentation to you. If we don't, I think the plan is still to do the same presentation that was given to the select board last month. The only way we can fund something this large is through a debt exclusion. So that's one. Other is the wastewater that I know we talked about a lot leading up to the recent special. So the voters will be asked in May if they'd be willing to go from 2% to 3%. We have a communication outreach that we are working on that will get more prominent in the next few months leading up to that, just to educate people, so they know what they're voting on. I know we've talked about it, but the state revolving fund is a way to hold down our interest rates on our bigger loans for qualified work, and then a new source of funding that didn't exist when we adopted our management plan in 2018 was the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund. So that has been interesting because I'm the town's rep on that board. It's really interesting how that started out as trying to pay 25% total principal relief in 4 years for towns that qualified. And what ended up happening is big towns like Barnstable, who have hundreds of millions already approved, or Chatham and Falmouth and P-Town, who addressed it previously, they were getting big payments, and it quickly realized that we were going to run out of money. So, working with some financial consultants that look at the fund constantly, we morphed it to a 25% principal relief every year. So the people that were promised those 25% payments over 4 years, they're getting those. But everyone from last year forward is going to get 25% principal relief annually to pay for their debt. That's a lot of money over time when you think about it. There's a lot of money rolling in there. We have far fewer hotel, motel stays and short-term rentals compared to other Cape towns. I think the balance in there is over $350 million. It accrues quickly, but it also gets spent quickly when you see the size of the projects. I just look at Andrew because I know you're accomplishing so much in Barnstable. Those roads are constantly being ripped up and pipes are going in. So we hope to join that someday.
But
Matt?
I think you alluded to the answer to this. The source of the funds for that 25%?
It's people's hotel stays. There's next to 2.75% that's charged for short-term rentals and hotel stays on the Cape, and it goes to the county. So those funds get segregated, and there's a board through the Cape Cod Commission. You can only fund projects that have been approved on that SRF list from
And that
the
full
state.
7.25% goes into this.
It's a 2.75.
2.7.
The full 2.75 goes in there.
Thank you.
Jim?
Yes, just going up to the one before it, the DPW facilities. Will somebody be providing an update on the roads situation at some point?
Definitely. Yep.
Okay, so we can have understanding where that project is before
Yep.
going into something like this.
Definitely.
Okay, thank you.
But just on the wastewater, we haven't given up at all on our regional efforts at Joint Base Cape Cod. It's hard. It's really hard, and we're still trying. We're trying to make arrangements, so if we can't work out things on the base, that we would do something locally, but that doesn't make any sense. So we're still pushing, so we're trying. Yep.
Jackie?
Yeah, just quickly on that. So is it the PFAS issue that is really the stickler here? What is the...
I think there are a couple of issues at the base. So it's definitely partially the PFAS issues because they have higher levels of contamination in certain parts of the base. But apparently any wastewater system, and Kevin can correct me, naturally concentrates PFAS a little bit. And so where they've had a system out there with infiltration beds where they dispose of the treated effluent, there's high levels of PFAS near where those RIBS, rapid infiltration basins, are. And so the problem at the base isn't treatment, because you can always build a plant or add things onto a plant or improve a plant to treat the wastewater. It's the disposal. So So far, we've been unsuccessful getting any clarity from the federal EPA branch in Boston or DEP on what they would approve for permits. And they would rightfully say, well, you haven't applied for a permit. True, but like you got to give us some idea. And we've had some large regional grants. When I say regional, the 4 Upper Cape towns plus Barnstable. We had 3 separate grants over like a 6-year period that studied how we could all work together and what the base could help us with. So right now, this is really rough. I think the base is allowed to discharge about 450,000 gallons per day. They're discharging about 100,000 gallons per day. We're trying to get in because our phase 1 could make up the difference, and we probably wouldn't even have to upgrade too much if they would allow us to do it. But longer term, the 5 Upper Cape towns plus the base, the need was about 4.5 to 5 million gallons per day if everything was met. So each of us are going about things a different way. We want to try to work with the base. Barnstable is trying to, so far, go it alone with innovative septic alternative innovative septic systems, which those so far haven't proven to work. Falmouth is, they have 14 embayments in their town that are bad. So they're trying to get permission for an ocean outfall, which would be the first of its kind other than Boston. So if that gets approved, that could help all of us. But if it doesn't get approved, they're going to need somewhere to pump their effluent. And so but the base is 14 miles away, I think, where their plant is and where the base plant is. And then Barnstable is trying to go it alone, and Mashpee is trying to do most of it on their own, but then have a small part on the base. But where that was slowed up, they're now trying to look at doing it all on their own. But I still think if we could I think all 5 towns would say, we want to work and have an opportunity at the base if we ever need it. It's just Sandwich would use it first, hopefully, and we would want to be the first town out there.
Yeah, and I think that's what, I guess the follow-up question is just, when do you project we would know?
I know.
Because that decision right there
huge.
has such a huge potential implication for this budget in general.
It does, because it's going to be a big number either way. But if we could go out to the base, we're confident the costs would be less over time, because similar to the dispatch, the way we would set up the formula would be based on your flow. So if we had 25% of the flow going into the plant, we should pay for 25% of the costs and the upgrades. So that is a big thing. We do have, we're trying to get better options locally if we have to go it alone, but hopefully we don't even have to consider those for decades, and we can do the base, but we're trying.
Any sense of when we would know?
I don't know. Recently, Dave Mason and I were just talking, and I know he's going to come in and do a wastewater update. We felt we should draw a line in the sand of 2 years. If we don't know if we can go to the base in 2 years, we got to start doing something locally. But 2 years in the span of wastewater systems isn't all that long, but we've been trying for 10 years. So it's, I don't know, we're getting frustrated, and I think the base is trying to do the right thing. The company that has Converge, that has rights to the base plant, they've talked to us. We talk at least once or twice a month. They plan to possibly submit an application to the state for the difference between what they're using and what they could use, just to see what the state would say. So, that would help us. If they would say, okay, if Sandwich is able to come in. And there's ways to address PFAS. So I want to stress, all those water contaminations that were coming from the base, all their treatment things include carbon filtration. We've seen them. There's huge tanks. They work really effectively. It's not it can't be solved. It's just you have to pay more to solve the problem. And there's federal court case. There's all sorts of crazy stuff going on. So the large scale capital needs, I really don't feel that there's significant municipal needs. There's upkeep needs, but other than that DPW downtown fire substation, it's really large-scale school needs that we need to focus on. It's clear that the current debt exclusion that the school has isn't enough to cover those existing additional needs. So we want to work on retaining a cost estimating firm to help us with that. We're trying to look at 2 smaller buildings, the DPW and fire, just to be able to tell people if we don't upgrade these, we're going to have to put money into them. And the cost estimate we got back, we were pretty blown away by, so we haven't approved that yet. So I'm a little nervous about how much the price might be when we factor in the schools, but we need to follow up on that. And we are preparing a maintenance plan for town buildings that we've had for a while. So lastly, I just wanted to talk about a couple of Community Preservation Act appropriations, and I think this goes back several years with the Finance Committee, and I think there was a clear statement that, hey, if there's ways we can use the CPA to address some of those capital improvement needs on our capital plan, we should consider that. So some of the examples that we've thought of, and the three of us and Leanne Drake were actually at the Community Preservation Act meeting last night. So one thing we talked about was the town hall restoration, which I'll mention in a second. There's some recreational courts. I don't know if you've ever been down to Oak Crest Cove at Peters Pond. There's some really nice multi-purpose courts down below. I say really nice because they get used a lot. They're not really nice in terms of their condition. They're just old. So, that might be something that we could approach the CPA about. And then the middle high school has talked to us. There's a parent group that's talked to us a little bit about fields there. And there's any number of uses that we could think of. So one of the things that you could think about at some point is increasing that surcharge. Far and away, the biggest cost of those three things would be the high school fields. If that was looked at, you could find a way possibly to pay for the debt through that. But again, we're taxed, in a way it's a surcharge, but it's more or less people are paying more. If you look at the list, which we actually gave the list to the CPA group last night, and I can get you a copy, and there's been just under 39 million in improvements that were done since it went into effect. But if you look at the list, it's really a lot of it's what makes sandwich. It's really pretty cool when you see the small things, the big things, the open space, the affordable housing efforts. I don't know if you've driven by the Wing School lately. That looks awesome. They're really making good progress.
Jim?
Speaking to that end, the fields behind the Wing School, are they still town fields? If we wanted to make improvements to those, would those be eligible for these sort of funds?
Those are town fields. The schools are still maintaining them.
Okay.
I think there's a side agreement with the Little League about those fields, but the only parts that's the town is if you go Morse Road, where the old tennis courts used to be, there's a outdoor volleyball court and those basketball courts that we put a new surface down. That part's town property, but the rest is school.
Okay.
And I would say, too, we were successful last night, and if you need to talk about this later, it might be more when we talk about the warrant. Last night, the CPC voted unanimously to support $1.2 million for this building to complete the renovations. We had already appropriated $1,042,000 from the sinking fund and from the capital budget last year, and then Heather secured a $200,000 grant from the state. So we had about 1.25. We got another, we got support for another 1.2. We'd be able to totally address all the windows in here, the water infiltration that's happening, and button up the roof and a couple of other things, and it would really, we think, put this building to bed for a while, which would be awesome. The windows were never touched other than tried to be trued up when the work was done 15 years ago. And believe it or not, it's been 15 years.
Nancy?
What do we get for matching funds from the state now, and how does it look for the future?
You know what?
Because I think it was going down, right?
It is going down. It varies year to year, budget to budget, administration to administration. We're not getting what we did 10, 15 years ago. It is going down.
What are we at now?
It's funny, I got asked this last night, and I didn't look today. I don't have it in front of me, so I can come back with a number for you. But I do know it's not what it once was.
But how much of the appropriations that you talked about, the millions, how much of that has gone to local government projects versus private groups?
Sorry. We have the list chronologically, and then we sorted it by the three categories: open space and rec, affordable housing, and historic preservation. So we can get that spreadsheet to you guys next week and bring it. It's really interesting.
I just made a note. I'll get that list out to everyone.
Thank you.
And it also includes, don't forget, at first it was the Cape Cod Land Bank for about 8 years, and then it switched to the CPA. So the first 8 years, it was just open space purchases. So I promise I'll start going a little faster. So this is the overall budget, issues, things we moved ahead with, things that we've gone backwards on. So tuition assessments. I used to include 2 graphs here. I'm you guys have heard it a million times. I used to have 10 bullets, and I've dropped it to 4. it's the cost center that's impacted us the most over the last 20 years. So what it reflects is local students who choose to go to public school options other than Sandwich. That assessment comes right off the top of our budget, not from the school budget. So in FY25 that we're in now, it was a hair under $5 million. So since its inception, it's been an 80% a year increase. But, and it's a big caveat, there's been significantly less impact over the last 5 years. So it's been less than 5% annually over the last 5 years. Last year it actually went down a little bit, I believe. So, but even with that drop, if you average it over the course of the program, it's gone up 80% a year. We talk about Upper Cape Tech, and yet the tuition assessment line is 1.4 million above that assessment for the year we're in now. And this is some of the demographics that Jim was asking about. There's been a 55% drop in local enrollment since our peak in FY02, so 2002. And when I say local enrollment, that's Sandwich students only. So about less than 10 years ago, we started to allow kids from other towns to come into Sandwich. I think that number this year is a little bit over 200 roughly, or about 200, I don't know. But that excludes people from other town going to school, because we're trying to compare it to data when we didn't allow kids in. And then if you look K through 12, 35% of students seek non-Sandwich educational opportunities. So that could be public schools, any of them. It could be private schools, which of course we don't pay for at all. It could be, there's a couple of remote learning schools that have now popped up in the state that a handful of kids, it includes homeschooled kids. So we get a breakout every year from the school, and we break it into like 5 different categories, and that's part of that database. So you can look that up and see how it's changed over time. But 35% of the K through 12 students go elsewhere. Many public, but some private as well.
But you started off this evening with the update on possibilities around federal, right?
Yeah.
And there's been discussion about increasing school choice opportunities. So that could adversely affect. If this number keeps growing,
Yeah.
that adversely affects us.
It could. Right? I will say, though, Massachusetts, I think, is ahead of other states in terms of public school choice. I mean, we have kids I know, because we see the list, that go to like Barnstable, Mashpee, Nauset. There's some in Plymouth. I mean, I think most schools on the Cape have opened up school choice to try to combat some of the losses from charter schools.
Yeah, we're sending kids to almost every major school system on the Cape, from Nauset to Falmouth.
And we're taking them in from places too. And then just a couple of, I think this is something that we should all be proud of. Like, there have been significant improvements over the last decade. The public safety buildings, the roads and infrastructure debt exclusion, the library renovations, Center for Active Living, 100 Route 6A, the school building improvements with the debt exclusion, the boardwalk, Section 111. We've been able to increase the operating budget for facilities, so those are all positive. And if you compared our capital budgets today to 15 years ago, like, we've come a long way and are doing a lot more. So I think it's fair to say many years ago we weren't doing enough, and I think we're getting there. So the next one takes up way more slides than we wish it would, because this has really jumped out at us over the past few years, but it sounds like we're going to be whacked this year. So the costs for employee benefit and liability programs. So we had an excellent health insurance cost control measure when we moved to Maya, I think it was 6-7 years ago. But I think some of those national health insurance realities are starting to impact everyone. And so we're going to get a high increase for FY26. You'll remember in the last 3-4 years, we've had weird fluctuations in our retirement assessment. There was one year it was close to 20%, and then it was 12. This year it's less than 4. So it's sort of gone all over the place. But part of that retirement assessment relates to health insurance for retirees as well. And that's sort of what that OPEB concept's about. But so for the proposed 26 budget, it's positive in the sense we're still making an appropriation to OPEB, not a lot, but we're still making a money appropriation into that trust fund. But our overall liability on our most recent actuarial assessment is $128 million. So it's prudent to constantly think about that and, hopefully get a AAA bond rating. When that all comes to roost, like, I think it's still up in the air, but if you think our number's large, I can't imagine what the state is, because they do all the teacher retirements across the state for public teachers as well, other than just state employees, so that's a lot.
You just mentioned the AAA. Did I just hear that Orleans got a AAA recently, and would they be any help to know how they got it?
I'm not sure about Orleans rating. I can't speak to that, but really what it all boils down to is our financial condition of the town, how much money we have in the bank, essentially. There's certain, demographic issues around town they look at, but the bottom line, and you only get rated, when we go out to sell debt. So it will probably be a couple years before we do it again. We've been at AA plus the last time we were rated, which was for the school project, a couple years ago. We were close, but we were told essentially we just simply did not have enough in reserves. And so, until we can get those numbers up, we really don't know. I've been asked this by the select board, and we've gone over it, numerous times. S&P, which is, our rating agency, unfortunately, they don't hand you a number and say you need to get to $10 million in reserves, and we had a target to shoot for. There's different factors in there, but really the bottom line, we'd need to put more money away in reserves, and probably in order to guarantee it.
I just wondered if there was a way to look at what Orleans has and what they have in reserve to see maybe what the proportions are.
Yeah, Orleans has more money than us.
Okay.
to be blunt, I'm not trying to be rude or fresh or anything like that. So I'll give you an example. We were just taking a look because a lot of the FY 25 data just got issued by the states, and tax rates and equalized valuations, like how much the town is worth. So this year, Sandwich is worth just a tick under $7.5 billion. Chatham is worth just a tick under $20 billion. You could probably put 2 or 3 Chathams in Sandwich. Think about that. Harwich by itself is worth, I think, $17.7 billion. The money down on that part of the Cape is simply different than what we have here.
And a lot of second homes.
Yeah, we can go on and on about, tax rates and all that, and, but yeah, unfortunately, they just have more money. When we get ready to sell bond, when we get ready to sell debt, we work with our financial advisor. We have a good financial advisor, but we're just going to have to see kind of where everything lands, the debt rating has changed over the years. When I first started with the town, they never asked about climate change. What are you doing about climate change? OPEB was barely discussed. The last time we went and bonded, I had to do pages about climate change. We had to work with Dave DeCanto and give a statement. Our OPEB, of course, comes up. So there's different factors I think S&P looks at over time. So who knows when we're ready to sell debt again, what factors I'll be looking for then. But ideally, the more money we have in the bank, the better off we're going to be.
I guess two fun facts. The first one I know is very accurate. So when Matt asked about short-term rental funds and all that, our total rooms tax, including short-term rentals, hotels, motels, Airbnbs, is right around $1 million. Heather and I are good friends with the manager on Nantucket. They brought in over $25 million last year from that one line item alone, and she literally said, "I don't know what we're going to do with the money." And I'm like, wow. And then the other one, which we could all go for a week vacation for $25 million probably. And then this relates to Nancy's question and Bill's response about even though it's not a reserve, they look at your free cash because, our free cash has been the last few years around 4 to 6 million, thereabouts in that range. Only because I look at it every year, and these places are smaller than us. Bourne, Mashpee, Falmouth bigger than us. Those 3 towns were all over 15 million in free cash. But you have to realize they're taxing people for that, but they're not spending it. So they may be, I'm making this up, but I don't know if it's the case, like they might be adding another 1.5 million to their health insurance number, so they bring the money in, but then they don't spend it, and they have that in their kitty for the next year. Well, we have never taken that tack because we've cut things pretty close.
I would think excess free cash is a sign of not budget inaccuracies.
I'm surprised that issue isn't raised in some other places because I think Mashpee and Bourne are very similar to us. I literally think they were both over 15 million, and Bourne has a lot riding on their solid waste facility. I think they bring in a lot of funds there because they do construction debris and everything, but that's a risk too.
I don't know if this will catch me or not, but a couple of the other issues that would, I think, reflect favorably on Sandwich is they do look at your investment and your ability to get a positive vote at the ballot for capital investments. So the town's vote to support the schools would reflect favorably on a future bond rating because it tells the rating agency that you're taking care of your assets. So those types of things actually work for you when you're looking at a rating. And then I think historically, and Bill might know better than I do, is that Cape towns that have a AA plus bond rating in the market rate very well against AAA communities in terms of what you actually see in interest. So it's something that we should definitely strive for, but it isn't always the thing that gets you the better interest rate. It puts you in a better position for sure. But the Cape towns have such strong property values and we consistently grow year after year in terms of valuation that we generally are pretty well suited in the bond market.
This next bullet is probably one of the most important ones. So if you just looked at our FY26 health and retirement increases, and I stress the health is estimated at this point, it's a little bit more than 1.8 million above FY25. Well, our whole FY26 2.5% increase, not including new growth, was like 1.98 million. So 91% of our 2.5% increase for this upcoming year is probably going to go towards health and retirement expenses. And I think I shared with you that the retirement is up by less than 4%. So it's really the health insurance changes that are impacting us a lot. So when we prepared the rough estimates, which we didn't go over in a ton of detail at our meeting in December, but we've been working on them for a while, we were using an increase of 10%. And we found out 2 Fridays ago that the average increase of the 120 groups was going to be 14.8%, but that each town would be told what theirs was based on their experience, knowing that being part of the bigger group mitigates any really bad years, that the range was going to be anywhere between like 9.5 and 19.5%. So we hope we're at the 14.8 because that's what we updated the budget for. And when I get to those pages, that's what we've used is what we heard was going to be the average, but we haven't been told what our changes were. So we don't think it's going to happen, but if it's the 19.5%, we've estimated that would be like another $500,000 in expenses. So that's why we didn't want to give out the budget binders when a $500,000 change is pretty significant and it would ripple through probably 10 or 15 pages. I can assure you, like Bill and I have, and Heather and everyone else, we've talked ad nauseum about, well, what if it's this? What if it's that? We have ways of addressing it. We'll be fine for next year. Once we know the number, we could fix those pages in 15 minutes. It's just that, our bigger concern is what if those health insurance and retirement trends continue? And it's, bigger than all of us. It's probably not sustainable long-term without going towards the excess levy capacity. But I don't think it's sustainable for any employer. It's not just public sector, and it's not just, Massachusetts or New England. It's happening everywhere. So in the next slide, I'm going to show you some really interesting bullet points that our insurance group talked about. But I just wanted to touch on one thing that'll never happen, but it was my stupid idea. And that's like, what if the state would think about some outside of the box way to address it? Like, would they ever just say that if any community could show what their actual increases were, that would be exempt from 2.5. Like literally our OPEB liability would go away because that's what the OPEB liability is based on. Hypothetically down the road, every single employee retires the same day and the town doesn't bring in any money. That's, I suppose they have to think about that, but that's not what we think would happen. And like I said, the state's liability is way more than the town's percentage-wise. So this is just a couple of key health insurance factors that are going on everywhere, and this came up at the board meeting of Maya, again, less than 2 weeks ago. So like people are using healthcare services a lot more than they were, especially post-COVID. Mental health and surgical procedures are up. There's been increased use and also the physical number of urgent care facilities versus primary care providers. And, you know, we've sort of been spoiled by having the Stoneman Center in Sandwich for quite a while. You know, Down Cape, I think there was a similar type facility in Harwich that was only open for part of the year. Now I think there's 4 facilities open year round, and when things go wrong, I mean, I think about like people in my family, how many times do we go to urgent care as opposed to primary care? And those costs are higher. They're probably not as expensive as the emergency room, but they're higher than primary care. Medical labor shortages have led to higher labor costs throughout the country. I thought this was really interesting that prescription drug costs continue to rise at double-digit pace, especially the use of those GLP-1 medications. And interestingly, like they're more expensive and very popular. So a lot of times some of the popular drugs are less expensive, but that's not the case here. So just nationally, they think those GLP-1 medications are impacting rates between 2 and 4%, which I thought was really interesting. And then we don't see it as much, but we hear about it, like, you know, Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements from the federal government to hospitals and providers are being underfunded, so that causes increase in charges to the end users and to the insurers. So, I mean, all those things, I think when they explain them to us, like, yeah, that makes sense. But that's sort of why, you know, I think we're facing not a crisis, but we are like there's a lot going on everywhere about this issue, and I thought this was really interesting. Of the 12 largest employers and biggest companies in Massachusetts, 8 of them are either medical institutions, pharmaceutical institutions, or scientific institutions related to health, and we have the second highest insurance on average across the country. So I mean, not Sandwich, but Massachusetts as a whole. So I mean, we're not going to cut our nose off to spite our, you know, so I mean, costs are going to stay high here. And then just one cautionary tale that I know we talked about.
I'm sorry, but
yeah.
just on health insurance, I know we made the move to Meyer, and that's proven to be cost effective over the years. Do we know what the competitive is running this year compared to Meyer's projection?
You probably can't make an equal comparison because the plans are very different. The options are very different. You know, the Cape Cod Municipal Healthcare Group that we left, we understand they're going to be around 15, slightly over 15. But at this point, our plans look entirely different than Cape Cod Municipal Healthcare Group. So we really can't make a straight comparison. You know, the big change that really affected us that was real positive for Maya was, you know, when we were with the Cape Group, we had 2 plan choices only. It was individual or family plan, and that was it. When we moved over to Maya, we were able to add what they call a 2-party plan. So it could be a husband and wife, it could be a parent-child, whatever the case may be. You know, we've seen probably over 100 employees adopt that. So not only did it save the employees money, it saved us money as well. But unfortunately, like at this point, our plans, they're different than Cape Cod, and I couldn't give you an accurate comparison. But, you know, I think the rates we're seeing everywhere, we're hearing around the state, you know, when I built as Bud mentioned earlier, when I built the budget originally, I used the 10% estimate, which I was given. You know, when we found out, you know, 2 weekends ago, it was going to be 15 average, you know, that changes things drastically for us. And, you know, we are literally waiting for that email to come in and that conversation to happen about what those rates are. And when they come in, we're ready to act accordingly, and, you know, we'll make the necessary adjustments as needed.
Pretty soon we're going to quickly see a slide where it'll show the health insurance going up by under 13%, and you would say, well, why? You said you did the average of 14.8. That's the medical portion. Dental's like 6%. We know that's going to be down there, and then our retiree percentages is separate. So there's more than just medical that's included in that number. And I know it's getting late, so I'll go quick, but like, we really shouldn't be issuing debt within 2.5, so we really have done that twice. Once with Sandwich Hollows. So again, good news, that expires in FY30. It'll free up $400,000. Not bad news because they were great projects, and we've been able to maintain that excess levy reserve. But hypothetically, what if we have to spend it on some of those employee-related costs? Then it gets tighter. But that the library renovations and Center for Active Living were funded within 2.5 as well, but they don't expire till FY51. That's about $870,000 a year. So just the general advice is we shouldn't do any more big projects within 2.5. We should issue debt. And so this part starts going a lot faster, I promise. So projected general fund revenues and expenses. So since we started, we got bad news on health insurance. The recommended general government, and from what Dr. Maruschek has shared, the school operating budgets are very manageable in terms of size and increases. We've retained some money going to stabilization fund and OPEB still. Not huge, but we've retained that. That's good. And then, several budget accounts outside of our control, we're waiting for better clarification. So this is one of the 2 pages we'll have in our packet every week. This is a balanced budget with the general government at 3.65%. We think all these numbers are really solid with the exception of the state aid and assessments, but we fluctuated those a little bit based on the numbers that the governor released. And then obviously the health insurance is the big one. So once we know that number, we'll be able to get the budget binders out, and then I'll quickly switch to the next page. This would be as if we were able to get to that optimum outcome budget, which would include the DPW public infrastructure for another $560,000, which is the next slide. Really, if we went into the excess levy reserve by that amount and we didn't need money for snow and ice, which Paul could answer that as well, but we're having an okay year, we shouldn't need that. We still have the reserve fund we haven't touched yet. That might be a way to think about, is it worth it tapping into that a little bit to try to address that longer term goal of road infrastructure by getting it in half in the operating budget, half in capital. Hopefully that's something that we could sustain. And here's just a quick summary of how we came up with that number. So really, we've talked about this for 2 decades about how to fund it and what's the best way. The last time we updated our pavement management plan, which the committee's really familiar with, was in February of 2022. And their annual goal was that if we could do $2.6 million a year, we should be able over time to keep our roads at a standard state that was in a really, not a great condition, but in a really good condition. And so just so you know what our annual funding is, our state Chapter 90 aid, which goes for public roads, $772,000. The first year of the state fair share program, we got an additional $443,000. This past year, it dropped to just under $200,000. We've heard the receipts that have come in at the state level on the so-called millionaire's tax for the fiscal year we're now have been pretty good. So hopefully that's going back up some. And then in the operating budget, the committee will remember we added $650,000 to the almost $200,000 that we had in previously a couple years ago. So the difference, if you add up all those things, it's just over $2 million. We're trying to get to 2.6, so we need another basically $560, and that is the one difference for the 10th time between the 3.65 and the 6.05. One nice part about it is if we did it this way, about half would be in the operating budget and half within capital. The important part about the state money is you're allowed to carry those over. So the best example that we've seen recently is the 130 Quaker Meeting House Road intersection in front of Forestdale School. That project we let build up for a couple years to do. The next project, the big one that we're doing now, and again, Paul will talk about that when he's in a few weeks, Quaker Meeting House and Catuit Road is the next big one we want to address. We can let state money build up to fund that. I know Paul would be really helped by having a little more money in his operating budget, so you can just count on that and make those plans. When he comes in, we'll give you a list of all the roads we've done in the last few years. It's really impressive. I think what sort of scares us the most, and Bill says it all the time, the drainage. Some of those drainage projects are really expensive. And we've knocked some of the worst ones off, but they're really expensive. So that's out there too. So just quickly, budget issues we need to monitor over the next few months. State aid and assessments, which we're all familiar with. The final cherry sheets won't be determined until several months after we vote at town meeting. Probably the biggest thing is, that health and property and liability costs. That's the other thing I should have said. Property liability, great news. Average increase of 1%. And if we pay them in the first month of July, we get a 2.5% discount. So that's great news. That includes workers' comp. liability, all of our buildings. So they've had a really good year through Maya. And then lastly, I should also say Upper Cape budget estimate. They still need to vote their final budget, but as many of you remember, their budget is based on the governor's budget that she submits. Because that was just given, Roger Forjak called me that Monday after it was released the prior week, and I forget what it was, but it's not going up by much at all. It's only, I think it's less than 4%, like 3-point-something%. We went up 5 students, so that's good news. Because you're right, we really don't control much of that, but that was good news. So as always, we're going to work internally to give you the best estimates that we have and revise them as they come up. And we're always thinking contingency plans. That's why whenever we do get that final number, we'll be able to get the binders out quickly. Constant reminder that we have a few months to go. I'll update those 2 pages. I think it's page 43 and 44 in the slides of the 1-page look at our total expenses, and then the one if we could do DPW. That'll be in your packets every week. Without a doubt, this will be our 21st year without an override. Despite significant increases in tuition assessments, employee-related costs, increased operating cost centers, and capital needs, over that same 21-year period, if you averaged across the Cape, the other 14 towns have averaged 7 requests per town. Truth be known, Barnstable hasn't asked for any either, nor have we. I think Wellfleet might have asked for like 40, but if you factor in across the way, most towns have asked for several overrides over that same period. So I think all in all, we've done really well with our budgets while addressing some of our needs. This was the slide for the board, so obviously I presented to you tonight. Really very minimal operating budget changes to review, and when you get your binders, you can see what those are. We want to focus on some of those bigger picture issues, and probably the biggest, I think, policy decision will be is can we find a way to balance the budget and address those DPW infrastructure needs. Gotten a ton of input from staff and support in preparing this. Heather and I would both say Bill's done 90+% of all this. We've had a lot of Zooms and a lot of meetings to try to address things as best we can, and we've met with those departments that needed a little bit more to keep level services. This is our 3rd year with the new budget format, and we mean this sincerely. If you guys want something to look differently, tell us and we'll do it next year. There's probably always more we could be doing electronically. Would people actually use it? That's sort of like we had sort of the cost benefit, like we should talk about that. And then we really think we'd like to put together a briefer, sort of more visual presentation, because this is the meat and potatoes for you guys in the select board. The general public, it's like I'm talking another language, probably it doesn't make as much sense. We're trying to think of like a higher level overview graphically with demographics, state and regional comparisons. I think sort of that thing about where our money comes from and goes is pretty telling. There's some pretty, we think pretty straightforward things we can be doing, and Heather's going to spearhead this and has worked on some outlines about what we might want to include and how we can address it different ways. So that's something we're going to be working on, and we would love your feedback as we work on drafts on that too, because you guys are in the know, and yet how do we get it so it's easier for others to understand? And I still think Sandwich is a special place. We have an awesome cooperative spirit internally. I'm so proud of our departments on how they work together especially when the chips are down. And the same holds true with the school. When we need it, we're there for each other. It's sort of weird in Massachusetts how we sort of are forced to fight for the same dollar, but we make it work. So again, the base recommendation is 3.65. Optimal outcome budget is 6.05, with the only difference being DPW infrastructure. I just asked Bill and Heather if they wanted to add anything, and
Any wrap-up questions or comments from Finance Committee members? Well, with that, thank you, Bill and Bud, Heather, and your teams for all the work that's gone into getting us started with the budget planning session. There's much ahead of us, as we know, over the next few weeks. I think for the Finance Committee, we really look forward to working with you as we get to a point where we can go to annual town meeting and look to town residents to approve a fiscal 26 budget. So thank you very, very much. Next on our agenda is an item carried over from our June 25th meeting. So those of you who were with us back then, think back. At that time, we discussed that the Finance Committee has a liaison on the Capital Improvement Planning Committee, and Kevin Klein has represented us well over the years. At that meeting, we announced that his term had expired, but he agreed to carry on for one more year if we so desired. But at that time, we didn't formally say yes to appointing Kevin. So with that, I would like somebody perhaps to make a motion to appoint Kevin to the CIPC.
Motion.
Motion by Crystal, second by Andrew. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any? Kevin will abstain. Okay, so 1 abstention, 7 in favor. Thank you, Kevin, for representing us well over the years, and I'm sure you'll do a great job for us in the year ahead. Appreciate it. Does anyone have any old business or any other business not reasonably anticipated by the chair for old business? Any new? Oh, yes. Go ahead, Matt.
After thinking about it a bit, I think I'd like to echo Nancy's concerns about Upper Cape Tech. And while completely agree and aware that we don't have much impact on, our voice can't have a ton of impact, I do think that we're in the same situation with most of our departments. We tend to put a lot more effort into our local departments and no effort into our Upper Cape Tech, endeavors. Obviously not meaning no effort on your parts, I'm meaning on our parts. And I think it might be a dangerous precedent to remove them from our meetings, as it gives a little bit more separation from our town to the school. And Upper Cape Tech is absolutely part of our community. It's absolutely our school. And we send a lot of students there. And I think not hearing what's going on might be doing a bit of a disservice to our board and to our community. So I think I'd like to echo Nancy's concerns.
Okay, thank you. Kevin?
To agree.
Okay. I will regroup with Bill and see what we can do. I guess one thought, as Matt was telling and giving us your perspective, I wonder, going back to the whole school choice thing, is how to, Upper Cape, I know they deliver their own budget, but, is there any way to get perspective on the other schools where sandwich kids are going to town? So that may be something we can chat about as well. Jackie?
Yeah, I think I actually take the other side of this, just because I think we're not really removing them from the town purview, but changing the frequency of the oversight. And so it seems reasonable to change the frequency of the oversight from annually to biannually. So yeah, I don't think we're actually removing them.
Thank you. Jackie?
Could I give one more reply to that?
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Matt.
and I don't disagree. And again, I think use of our time is very important. But I think the longer you sit in these chairs, the more that you hear the same things over and over. I mean, a lot of this, I've been sitting here for, 8 to 10 years now. It's quite redundant every single year, every single department, every single budget. And so I think if we take that attitude, we could cut out all of this. And I don't think that would be wise. And so I think my point is not necessarily about even the redundancies. It's about keeping Upper Cape Tech involved in our community and giving Superintendent Forget an opportunity to come in front of our townspeople and speak to us. And so I think that's my It's not necessarily the oversight. It's more giving them the opportunity to come in front of us, keep people in the community aware that they are part of our community and they are part of our town.
Thank you, Matt. Jim, you were next.
And yes, just to clarify, for the student kind of enrollment information I was looking for, I did appreciate the 55% one from 2000, but I'm looking for a bit more specific if it's out there from really every year, the percent of students, since we reorganized. I think we reorganized the schools 14 years ago, something like that. So I'd be intrigued to see, did that have an effect in, our kids leaving at the same rate as they once were?
If I could talk, and wasn't there a meeting we had last year that had all the percentages of all the like the year over year? There is information on that.
Yeah, we can
that we
get
got
that.
last year that went year over year on the enrollment and how many, and if it was low, it was due to a low birth rate. So it really had everything in there. And I know that I know that I have that, in some of ours. Maybe we could get that again. Yeah.
That financial database has like all the data you need on a couple of those slides in there. And if you're looking for something more specific or something different that's in there, we can certainly obtain that for you without issue. That's not a problem.
Perhaps we should give Dr. Marashek a heads up on that for next week as well. He can talk about that.
I can do that.
Nancy?
Have you already spoken with Mr. Forget and told him never mind, or what were?
I have not. I don't know. Bill is usually the one that, or Bud.
I told him we hadn't nailed anything down yet. He did say that they were asked to submit and did submit an exploratory effort to look at building a gymnasium out there and possibly one other small building. It will take years, but that was something that he mentioned that might be a little bit different if they come in, but I don't even know if how far that's progressed yet. But
Jackie?
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, on the school and the number of students that are choosing other school systems, I think I had asked at one point when the superintendent was in whether we had ever done a survey, in corporate speak, it's like voice of the customer. You want to understand why the community is choosing what they're choosing. So it's sort of like a family survey that might go out, that might be collated, that we really understand what is driving a family to choose elsewhere. And it doesn't even mean that they don't think Sandwich is a good school. I think we have a lot of evidence to the contrary. I think we just need to understand those to counter them if we're going to counter them. So I did ask whether a survey was in the offing. Is that something that we could also ask about? I mean, I'd like to hear what the rest of the group thinks.
Yeah, we can certainly give Forget a heads up on that as well. I remember the question, and I'm forgetting the response. I think the answer was, I know they have a student advisory committee.
They send surveys to every family that that does leave the district. I thought I recall.
I think you're right.
I'll follow up with that.
The results of the survey would be interesting. Yeah, that would be interesting.
Anything else on old business? If not, how about on new business? Anybody have any new business? Okay. Oops, sorry, I'll repeat that. I didn't have my mic on. I apologize, despite my instruction at the beginning. So the next Finance Committee is planned for next Tuesday, February 11th at 6 p.m. The school budget will be presented at that time. Finance Committee members should have received a web link to the budget, or you can pick up a copy of the budget at the school administration building at any time that they're opened. Also, if there's any focus areas or specific questions you want Dr. Marashek and his team to be prepared for, please submit them my way, and I'll be sure to get them to Bill and to the school administration team.
A copy of that budget will be attached to the email that goes out as well.
Okay, thank you. So I've sent him some, I will be sending him some follow-up items from other discussions we have where we've gotten some of the answers, but not all of the answers from our prior meetings, I think like in December in particular. So any other closing remarks? If not, motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Motion by Crystal, second by Nancy. All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Have a great evening, everybody. Thank you.